So we are now up to chapter 18, The Moving Floor. Just as Mr. Penguin and Colin crept through the door, a sudden blast of howling wind slammed it shut behind them. Somewhere in the darkness above them there was the clunk of a bolt dropping home, and Mr. Penguin trembled. They were now locked inside the fortress. It was pitch black at first, but slowly Mr. Penguin's eyes became accustomed to the dark. He saw they were standing at the top of a set of stone steps that led down to a cavernous hall. It was icy cold in the room, and had they been able to see properly, they would have noticed their breath billowing from their mouths. Mr. Penguin squinted. Something on the far side of the hall seemed to be glowing. He squeezed his eyes almost completely shut and could just make out another door with a yellowy-green light spilling through the cracks round the door frame. "I think we need to head over there," Mr. Penguin whispered, pointing with a flipper. Colin nodded, and they walked down the steps together towards the glowing light. Mr. Penguin was first to set foot on the ground, but he quickly jumped back onto the last step. The floor of the entrance hall was springy and rubbery. What on earth was it? He could hear a gentle hissing sound coming from somewhere nearby, like someone had turned a tap on. Surely some mad person wasn't standing in the darkness turning on taps. I like a nice hot bath, thought Mr. Penguin, scratching his beak, but not in a terrifying fortress up a mountain in the middle of the blizzard with no lights on. I wouldn't be able to find my rubber ducky. He shook himself and remembered they were here to rescue their friend, and hopefully all the stolen rodents too. It was a very important rescue mission. Mr. Penguin straightened his nice hat and tried walking on the floor again. This time the ground hissed angrily and started to slither and move all around his ankles. Mr. Penguin leapt back beside Colin. He gulped. Just then a shaft of moonlight slipped through one of the windows and lit up a knife-thin slice of room. Mr. Penguin could finally make out what was beneath him. There wasn't a mad person running a bath. Oh no, it was something worse, much worse. The entire floor was covered with slithery snakes, all hissing and wiggling about very angrily. There were small snakes, big snakes, and some snakes so gigantic they looked as if they'd been able to swallow Mr. Penguin in one big gulp. "Snakes!" cried Mr. Penguin as he and Colin hoofed it back up the steps. Why did it have to be snakes? The snakes turned as one to look at the intruders and licked their chops. "Uh-oh," said Colin's pad helpfully. "Do something, Colin," yelped Mr. Penguin, tugging at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Before we end up as dinner." But what could Colin do? They were trapped. Their only chance of escape seemed to be a glowing door on the other side of the room full of hungry serpents. Of course, Colin could run about, boffing them all on their noses. That would be fun. But there were an awful lot of snakes, and he might not be able to save his penguin-y friend from becoming a very tasty snack. Mr. Penguin was doing his panicky dance, running back and forth and flailing his flippers above his head, when he suddenly slipped and fell into something dry and papery hidden in the darkness. "Help!" he cried. "Colin, help! It got me!" Colin leapt over to his friend and untangled him. It didn't take long, but once Mr. Penguin was free, he lay on the step quivering so much that the arrow in his hat wouldn't stop boinging about. "Am I still alive?" said Mr. Penguin, one flipper clamped to his forehead. "Have I been eaten?" Colin didn't answer. He was too busy examining the object that had trapped his friend. He grinned. "Aha," said his pad, and then, "Of course." He turned to Mr. Penguin and wrote on his pad, "I have a plan."